So today we're going to go through the agenda, and let's get started here. We're going to go over what Intune and AutoPilot is, a high-level overview, what licensing is required, as well as maybe network requirements. We're going to go through the initial settings, such as the enrollment status pages, creating groups, getting your first device imported, assigning profiles, as well as going through the enrollment process and getting the initial experience set up and running. So I've kind of broken this up hierarchically in the PowerPoint that'll be available at the end of this video. So we've got the overviews over on the left-hand side, the requirements, the enrollment status page, and I tried to break it up as easy as I could based on what I knew we were going to be covering. Just because there's so many different configuration options and step to Intune depending on how fine-tuned you want to make it. So what I did was I collated the best that I could of what we know a lot of educational institutions will configure the first time. And so I tried to make this in as condensed and as easy as way as possible. So in order to do this, what I've done is Alex, one of my other coworkers here, has set up a demo tenant. And in that demo tenant, it's completely brand new. It's never been set up before. And we're going to all work together to go through the actual deployment processes, getting the tenant initially set up online, and going through these steps. And here's part 2 and part 3. So I don't want to spend too much time on the PowerPoint content just because I know a lot of us have been pretty familiar with what Intune and AutoPilot are, but just as a quick high-level overview, one slide too fast. So AutoPilot is a service that the second a Windows 10 machine comes online for the first time, the second that it's connected to the internet at UBI, it's checking into the AutoPilot service. So when you connect it, it says, hey, we're checking into Microsoft for all the latest updates. That's actually talking to the AutoPilot service and confirming, hey, am I a corporate-owned device? Am I a personally owned device? If I'm a personally owned device, AutoPilot's going to have nothing to do with it because it's at home. If it's a corporate-owned device, what's going to happen is it's going to recognize that and it's going to start pulling down an AutoPilot profile. And you can see that in this photo. And then what happens is that AutoPilot profile more or less changes how UBI interacts with the customer, and then actually integrates it into the Intune management system. And then from there, Intune manages the device's policy settings, application controls, like everything else that you need from there. So think as AutoPilot is kind of the hand that does the initial kind of imaging steps, so to speak, gets it into a managed state by Intune, and allows you to push configurations and policies. Now, what's nice about this system compared to things like SCCM, for example, is that this can be done anywhere that you have internet access, and anywhere that, an internet connection of, I think the minimum requirements are about 25 megabits per second. But as long as you have a traditional internet connection at home or in your school environment, you can go through a user enrollment or a self-deploy mode enrollment. And I'll be going more later into how those are different as we go through the setup phases. But the big thing from this that I just want our customers, different people to understand, AutoPilot is a service that runs in the cloud that your partners will integrate the hardware hashes into that service, and that's what locks the devices down to your tenants. So that way, in case someone else reloads the OS on it and they try and set it up again, AutoPilot is going to immediately take over that device again and reset it up the same way that you had it set up before in your environment. This is done from a security perspective, so that way in case BIOS controls aren't enabled, the students can't use the device for other nefarious purposes. Now, there is the hybrid Azure AD join option, and I wanted to show this and include this because when we go deeper into this, we'll have future sessions that'll go over why this might be useful. But today we're doing a pure Intune and Azure AD domain join setup. Hybrid Azure AD join processes are usually for environments that are a little bit older that might only have a connection to on-prem AD, or their SCCM environment might be really old and it has been updated for a long time, but it's still being in use today. Those are a couple of quick use case scenarios where hybrid Azure AD join might be a good fit. There's also some situations where networking requirements, such as if you have a network access controller in play, but those are more so where you should be having discussions with your DSRs as well as your Microsoft contacts to kind of go through those integrations. All right. So Intune and AutoPilot, it's optimized for Windows 10, Windows 11. It's going to take care of the software, settings, updates, features, and user data. So when we're talking about user data, we're talking about like OneDrive configuration policies, as well as enterprise state roaming features, which you might have heard that term before. But in this instance, there's a number of settings that Azure AD will keep on behalf of the user. And as they sign in from the device to device, or say a device is re-imaged and the user signs in for the first time again, that same information will pull back down. But at a high level, this tries to emulate what SCCM does on-prem. Just the biggest difference is you're not imaging things anymore. You're not going through and dealing with driver files. You don't have to, like SCCM, you can get really down to the nitty-gritty with this stuff. But Intune and AutoPilot, its bread and butter is really meant to be like that out-of-boxing experience where it's supposed to be super easy for the customer to just set it up on their own, go through the initial enrollment steps, and within 30 minutes or so, have a usable device that they can use in their environments. So when we talk about this, we talk about the life cycle and being able to use these systems. So with Windows AutoPilot and Intune, and there's a break, and then say, for example, the machine is broken. How that works is the device is repaired by the OEM or by Microsoft, and they re-add that to the AutoPilot service so it can be re-enrolled. If the devices are leaving the environment, you would retire the device. So you can see here, we start with procurement, which would be through like your DSRs or your partners, whoever that might be. Schedule that with them and work through the deployment steps. Then once that's done, the users enroll it, or you use self-deploy mode. That gets the devices ready, and then you manage them over the life cycle of the device. It could be 3 years, it could be 4 years, it could be even longer. Keep in mind, is on the Intune side, as long as the device is still functioning and it's getting the newest versions of the OS and it's not having any issues with that, you can still manage it with Intune and AutoPilot. So you could very well get past 4 or 5 years out of the device as long as the TPM chip and whatnot were recently updated on it. It's all cloud driven. SCCM requires connection to an on-prem domain controller. It requires access to a number of different resources that are joined on your domain, such as file shares if you're not hosting that on SCCM, for all your applications are probably held. In the Intune AutoPilot system, you're uploading all of this content to the Intune service, and it's managing the storage for you. It's managing the distribution of the applications. You're not having to handle all of those on-premises infrastructures with SCCM anymore. Intune and AutoPilot will start handling all of that for you. So it's really kind of important to understand. At the core end of the day, Intune and AutoPilot were really cloud-driven technologies to where you could manage a device and deploy it anywhere as long as you had a decent internet connection. Now, what are some of the licensing requirements for this? So on the business side, you're going to need Microsoft 365 business subscriptions, E3 or E5. There are also different add-on subscriptions that you can purchase to add Intune. Microsoft 365 frontline subscriptions, F3 and F5, as well as their subsequent breakdowns and add-ons. On the academic side, you've got A3 or A5. You'll also hear on the education side things such as enterprise mobility. Those are our older SKUs that over time will more than likely be phased into the new bundle packages, which is A3 and A5. And then finally, from a licensing perspective, is enterprise. And you'll need either E3 or E5 or the subsequent licensing SKUs added as add-ons to your your E1 subscriptions. Now from there, what it's also going to add, if you did go down the enterprise and mobility security add-on, is it's going to add Azure Active Directory Premium P1 or P2, depending on when you purchased it. That's one thing that you really want to look at over from a licensing perspective, because if you're on A3, that only gives you Azure Active Directory Premium P1. If you're on A5 or E5, that gives you P2. So during this transition and change, that's just something from a licensing perspective that you should probably take into consideration in case some changes in terms of licensing counts need to be taken into account before your next renewal. Now, this I broke down as the one-time configuration tasks for us to use in the future. That way you can kind of walk through this step by step. But what Justin and I are going to do is I'm literally going to be walking through all of this with him, and you'll be able to follow along with us, and people are going to be able to ask questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my PowerPoint right here. And then I'm going to have Alex pull up his demo environment, and we're going to slowly go through the initial deployment steps for piloting an Intune environment. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here real quick. All right, stop presenting. Oh, this will end the presentation for everyone. Oh, so Alex, it looks like you'll need to take control and share.
Okay.
If not, I'll cancel, but it's kind of making me think like it's going to kick us off the presentation.
Okay.
There you go. Perfect. All right, so what we're going to be showing right here real quick is Alex has got a virtual machine installed on his machine, and that virtual machine is going to simulate a computer that's being unboxed for the first time. Now, if you don't mind, Alex, if we could pull up our Intune environment, and we're going to log into endpoint.microsoft.com. And it's very important. Right now, I know that we will be transitioning to Intune.microsoft.com, but for the time being, that is not available for GA. Endpoint.microsoft.com for right now is the the URL that you should be using for this setup. All right, now as well, Alex, if you could please open up the Intune for Education portal in a new tab. If you need, I can grab it for you.
Got it.
Perfect. All right, now one of the first things I want to go over on the left-hand side will be groups. So if we can click on this tab, please. All right, so we've got all devices and all users. You're going to see that in every environment that's spun up for the first time or previous environments that you're kind of taking over, if this is your first Intune deployment that you've done. So you've probably been taught in all of your documentation that Azure AD is a flat architecture. And what that means is that there's really no OU structure to the environment. Now, since then, we've added, they're called organizational units in Azure AD, but they don't act the same way as on-prem AD does or in Google environments. And to compensate for that, what Microsoft did was in the Intune for Education portal, they created this system that shows group members that are members of each other and then makes it look like an easy format in the Intune for Education portal, so it's easy to break down and see. So to get started with this, I'm going to help Alex create the groups that I typically see that are initially set up, and then show you how to deploy the AutoPilot profiles. So Alex, if you could please create a group here. And what name of this theoretical school do we want to come up with? Anybody got a fun, interesting name?
Contoso is always the go-to Microsoft. So Contoso Schools.
Sure, Contoso Schools. Let's do that. So we're going to put in Contoso Schools devices, and we're going to put spaces in this one. And it's important to understand, group names can have spaces in them. And if you need to change the group name later on, don't worry about causing any issues because that won't cause deployment problems later on. The group name is actually not as important as the object ID. That is the value that you can't change. So let's go ahead and create this group. Yeah, we'll keep it as assigned for now.
Keep it as assigned.
Yep, and I'll go over in the future more about what dynamic is. Yep.
Perfect.
All right, now to create this group kind of hierarchy, next to Contoso School Devices, we've got our ellipse menu, the 3 dots on the right-hand side. If you click that, you'll get an option to create subgroup. Now you technically can go and create the groups manually one by one and then add them as members of each other, but I find that to be a little bit tedious, so that's why I like creating them in the Intune for Education console. Now for our business customers, unfortunately, you will have to manually go into the, I like to call it Big Intune, but the main Intune console, and you'll have to go and add groups as members of each other. So group name under here, we're going to call this Contoso Schools Departments Devices. We're going to create this one. All right, and underneath the departments devices, we're going to create a Contoso Schools IT Departments Devices. So, and as he's doing this, you can see on the left-hand side that the little carrots are starting to appear. And that lets you know that the groups are members of each other. And I'll explain here in a moment why this is even more important. So yep, IT department devices, perfect. So create that group. All right, now under IT department devices, we're going to create two other subgroups. So the first one we're going to call 1v1 user enrollment pilot. Perfect, and create this group.
You spell that right?
Yep. Oh, thanks. Perfect. I didn't realize it was misspelled. And then under the Contoso Schools, not this one, but the Contoso Schools IT department devices, we're going to create another subgroup underneath that. And we're going to call this one self-deploy enrollment pilot. And what this is going to do is this is going to allow you to simulate both AutoPilot deployment processes in your environment. Because you might have lab devices, for example, that you don't want a user to have to sit at to set the device up. And you might have situations where you have shared laptop carts or stuff like that, where the self-deploy mode is going to be needed, but other areas where you are going to want the user to enroll it. That's why during the initial setup and POC phases, we set up two different groups. And another big reason being is, so as you can see this hierarchy and how this is broken up now, if we deployed an application or a policy or something that we're doing to control the devices in our environment, in this configuration setting, if we deploy that option to Contoso school devices, it will filter down to every other subgroup beneath it. And that's very helpful because that gives us our OU structure back, similar to how it would be on on-prem AD. Because you know, if you do it at that main container, all the subcontainers underneath it, unless you've disabled inheritance, it will apply. And this makes it a lot easier when you're starting to scale things at the device level. So what additionally is nice about this is it also gives you a way to break down all the different, say, buildings, or say you want to do it by grade level. And you can break it all up in this system. And then in the future here shortly, I'll show you how to change these to dynamic device groups. And as you make large purchases with the OEMs or with the DSS store, whoever you purchase your devices from, as they're added to the AutoPilot service, Intune will automatically add them to these device groups, which will automatically add their profiles, which will automatically then add all the applications, policies, and everything that you're going to want on those devices. So you can really automate this system. So from beginning to end, your IT staff don't have to touch the device unless there's a particular reason that you need them or want them to. So from here, now that we've got this created, Alex, if we could go please over to the fourth tab at the top, our main big Intune application, please. What I'd like to go through and set up is the tenant options and make sure that we've got all of the different things turned on. So if we go into tenant administration, please.
Might have to point me where that is. Oh, tenant admin.
Oh,
okay.
yeah, right, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, bottom left-hand corner. Oh, we're perfectly fine. All right, so we can see in here that that we've got licenses in here for Intune, so we can proceed down that path. It's really nice to check in here first, because if this is your first time deploying the system, if you're using like the development accounts, sometimes there might be issues where the Intune licenses didn't activate properly. Or in some cases, you might have activated a trial. And it's just really important to understand that if you check for the Intune licenses here, as long as you have a couple of them, you can continue with the testing phases. So now that we've gone through and created the groups, and we've gone and validated that our tenant status is in good working condition, the other thing I want to show real quick is let's go to the Service Health and Message Center. So keep in mind, Intune and AutoPilot are all cloud services. Microsoft is managing, oh, sorry, it's next to, if you move to the right a little bit more, yep, right there. So with Intune and AutoPilot, it is a cloud-based system that Microsoft is managing, which means we're managing the compute for you, the network integrations, like everything. You don't have to manage this like you do with your on-prem SCCM infrastructure. However, what that does mean is that there might be occasional issues or advisories that you might want to look in here. And what might occasionally happen is, you know, Intune might be in a degraded state, and for an hour or so, applications might not be able to deploy. And this is a great way to check and see if there's any service health issues before you go down the diagnostics path. So I just wanted to show us, the team real quick, this, just in case this might be useful, in case they were, the first time they come into the environment, they see a bunch of things that have popped up that there's an issue. It might be best to wait until the advisories have gone away and to proceed with the test.
Makes sense.
So now that we've kind of talked about this, the initial tenant configuration options and the licensing, now we're going to go through the steps of enrolling our device in AutoPilot. Now, traditionally, your partner would handle those steps for you. Or if you're in a hybridized state, SCCM co-management would do it for you. Or finally, if you're only domain joined at on-prem AD, there are group policies to get them to a hybrid state with AD Connect. So what we're going to do today is we're going to import a test device, the manual method, to kind of go through the process of, if we've got an extra device that's in a box and we want to test this with, how we can proceed with that. Or, if we want to buy a new device and just start fresh with a new device that's never been touched by SCCM before. So, Alex, if you could please pull up the virtual machine. All right, and let's go ahead and connect to it and get to our UBI screen. All right, perfect. So this is the initial UBI screen that everybody's going to see on a Windows device the first time that they've unboxed it. So if you don't mind, Alex, if you could do a Shift F10 in sequential order, and don't forget to click into the VM first. On a Windows machine, you'll just want to, click the touchpad or just make sure the mouse moves the first time. Perfect. Now we've got our command prompt box pulled up. This will allow us to start putting in a few PowerShell scripts that will allow us to talk to the TPM chip, that's the security chip built into the motherboard, and pull a hardware hash from it. Now, why this is important? So every modern Windows device has that TPM chip installed. And what that TPM chip does is, think of it as like a security chip that talks to the AutoPilot service. And if the AutoPilot service can't securely and safely talk to that chip, it will consider it not trusted. And so that's why it's so important that when we go through these steps that you work with your partners to make sure that you're following those AutoPilot steps, because if you get devices in here that are imported and either they're not yours or they're not imported properly, AutoPilot won't be able to work appropriately. So it's just really important that you're importing the devices into AutoPilot cleanly to reduce issues in the future. So Alex, do you have it pulled up, like the web page for this, or do you want me to tell you the commands or put them in chat? What do you think will be easier?
Just go ahead and toss them in the chat and I'll type them in.
Okay, perfect. All right, so I'm going to put this first one in chat. And pardon any weird formatting. And then there's a space, and then pipe, and then there's not a space after. Yep, there you go. Execution, policy.
Is there a space bypass?
Yes. And press enter. Perfect. Now the next command that we're going to run. Now what this one is going to do is it's going to install a PowerShell script locally on the device, and that PowerShell script is what's going to talk to the TPM chip and import it into the AutoPilot service for you. So after name, the pipe is next to the name, or the hyphen, I should say. It still didn't move it over. And then space, get, hyphen.
There we go.
Yeah, Windows, AutoPilot info. There's not a space after that one.
Okay.
AutoPilot.
Pilot.
Info.
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 Yeah.
There you
go. Space force.
Yep, and then space dash force. Perfect.
Okay.
Enter. Now, it's really important that you have the device connected with Ethernet at this point because it needs to reach out to the PowerShell repository library to install the script. And that's what it's doing right now. And it's asking you for permission to make a change to that system. So Alex, you're going to type in Y and then press Enter to confirm the change. Yep, and we're just going to wait a second for it to install. Yep, and we can see the progress of it up here. Right, perfect. Now that we have the PowerShell script installed, we have to allow the PowerShell script to run. Now, for security purposes, Windows devices have PowerShell scripts disabled by default. So to get around that, we're going to run a PowerShell script that for this process, it's going to allow us to override that. And that is going to be this command right here. And that's going to be the set execution policy scope process execution policy remote signed. And that way, only remote signed PowerShell scripts can run in this session. Oh, there's a space after process, sorry. There you go. Perfect. And enter.
Hold on.
Oh, did I not see something was misspelled? All right, perfect. And now we're going to run the PowerShell script. Now, since PowerShell has IntelliSense, if the script is installed, it should auto-fill it in for us if we give it some parameters at first. So please type in get-Windows, Alex, and then press Tab.
Like that? Tab?
Yep, and then press the Tab key. You see, IntelliSense will auto-fill in the rest of that PowerShell script in for you so you don't have to fully type it out. So now we're going to go ahead and run it. Oh, I'm sorry. We were supposed to put a dash online at the end. So press the up arrow one time. And then press space and then dash online. Perfect. That tells it to initiate a connection with the online tenant. The other way just showed you the hardware hash.
Okay.
Yep, so go ahead and press enter. Perfect. Yep, and it does use the Microsoft Graph API to make these changes. So if you do get really great on the command line level and you want to create your own application, you technically can do that. I've seen some of our larger schools, they'll create like very advanced PowerShell scripts that go through the auto enrollment process and they give it to partners. So it auto imports them into groups and whatnot. So here you'll need to sign in to a global administrator or an Intune administrator. One or the other is going to be required. None of the other permissions will work. So please make sure whoever's going through this the first time does that. So Alex, if you could please sign into the admin account for this demo tenant. And I know it might take you a minute because it was a new account that was created for this.
Yep, give me a sec. Here we go.
Yep. Yeah, whenever we do these demo accounts, it does take us a little bit longer just because the domain isn't really shortened at all. And so it's a little bit harder for us to kind of type it all in. Okay, yeah, I thought it was going to be a on Microsoft.com one. Almost there. Let's just hope it doesn't ask you the whole, you haven't set it up the first time. All right, perfect. That's what we wanted to see. So the first time that you're going to do this in your environment, it's going to ask you for permissions to give it access to, RBAC settings, Intune device configurations, and to be able to import it into your tenant. So you want to approve of this. You'll scroll down, consent on behalf of your organization, and accept. Perfect. That way that PowerShell script has been given permission to import this into your AutoPilot tenant. Now on the partner side, the partner will send you an email that will auto-initiate that process, and then they will be permitted to add devices to your AutoPilot tenant for you. And in some cases, they might not do it for you, but they would give you a file that you import, and you just point it to the file that you've downloaded. And I'm sure some of you have seen us do this before. And then once it's imported, then you can, then it's in the AutoPilot service and you can continue with deploying it through Intune. Now, this does take a little bit of time to go through this, because what it has to do is it has to go through multiple different processes. It's got to talk to the TPM chip. It's got to validate that it's working and in good shape, that there's no encryption issues. It's got to talk up to Azure, make sure on its side the same thing is working, and then it's got to go through, talk to the AutoPilot service, and then add that hardware hash in here. So you'll see this go through and do this probably 10 or 11 times. And then by the end of it, you should see that it says that it's successful. And once you get a success, that's when we can move on to the next step. Now, this will take a little bit of time to go through and do, so probably about a minute or so. So in the guide, the deployment guide that I'll be including with this, at the bottom of these steps, I'll have the breakdowns of all the documentation that you'll need. So, how to manually import this, in case you want to look at the Microsoft docs, as well as the Intune for Education settings and the partner AutoPilot registration process. So just in case you're curious of what partners support it, and just to validate that a model that you're going to use is eligible, this is a website that you can go to help get that confirmation. Additionally, your OEM should be able to answer that question for you, but pretty much most every modern Windows 10 and 11 system has AutoPilot capability. Now, the one thing I want to preface with this, though, is personally owned devices that ship with Windows 10 or Windows 11 Home are not eligible for Intune enrollments via AutoPilot. And here's the reason why. AutoPilot requires a Windows 10 Pro or Enterprise or Education key, because remember, Enterprise and Education are very similar, in order for all the features in Intune to function. So if the device starts out with a Windows 10 or 11 Home OS, right off the gate, the OS isn't permitted to be managed because it's thought of as a personally owned home device. So if people are purchasing things, make sure people understand they can't just go to Best Buy and order a cheap device and get it in their tenant. It's not going to work like that. They're going to have to make sure that whatever devices they're purchasing comes with an OS that at least has Pro on it. Now, if they go and purchase a Surface device from Best Buy, for example, Surface devices always ship with Pro, except for SE. And so if you get a Surface device, unless, now I should preface this. If you order something from like AT&T and whatnot, those do ship with Home. But as long as you're validating from Best Buy or whoever you're purchasing it from that it's at least Windows 10 Pro or Windows 11 Pro, you're good to proceed in case you want to, order a device and ship it to a customer at home and you need it like instantly, quickly overnight. And you'll run into those situations in some cases where maybe the manufacturer can't get you a device quickly because, maybe Lenovo's currently transitioning from the old 15-inch model to the new 15-inch model, and there just aren't any available. So in a pinch, being able to order a device from somewhere is nice. I just want to make sure everybody understands it needs to come with Pro. If not, you will run into issues. Okay, now we can see that the device has been successfully imported, and we can see the serial number that is associated with the device. Now, with virtual machines, it's going to be this long string of characters, which is the GUID on your Hyper-V machine. And when you're going through this with an OEM device, it's going to be the serial number that should be on the bottom of the unit, or should be included if you do asset tagging with the serial number on it. Just depends on how you've done that with the manufacturer and the OEM. All right, Alex, so if you don't mind, if we could now go ahead and minimize this. We're not going to close it. We're going to minimize it, please, because we've imported it into AutoPilot. So if you could minimize your Hyper-V at the top, little minus, perfect. And then if we could open up our normal Intune portal, please. All right, so now that we've got the device imported into AutoPilot, I want to show you where that actually exists in the system. So if you could go over to Devices, Enroll Devices, and Devices on the bottom right-hand corner. This is where the AutoPilot deployment service shows all of the different serial numbers and devices that have been imported into AutoPilot. So anything that you've done manually, anything that a partner has done, that'll all show up in this interface. Now, if you look here, we've got a number of different options to select from, but really what I want to click on real quick is Alex, please click over the serial number. Don't click next to it. All right, so if we click over it, we get a little informational pane on the right-hand side. Now, what we're going to go do is we're going to go create our AutoPilot profiles for this system. And as you can see over here, this is a great way to see if a profile has been assigned to the device. And see, at this time, we don't have anything assigned because we haven't created them yet. So now, if you don't mind, Alex, if we could go up to Enroll Devices, Windows Enrollment, that breadcrumb at the top. Yep, right there. All right, if we could please go to Deployment Profiles. Or no, I'm sorry, I missed a step. We need to do our enrollment status page first. So, yep, Devices, Enroll Devices, and Enrollment Status page. All right, now this will have a default one in here that applies to all users and devices. Feel free to leave this one in here, but we're actually going to create one that will apply to the entire infrastructure. So we're going to create, and we're going to do the Contoso default enrollment status page. Perfect. And we're going to click next down at the bottom.
So with these names, Tyler, like these don't change, so these can also have spaces?
Yes, these can also have spaces, correct. It's mostly in the AutoPilot service where it won't let you do things like that.
Okay.
And I honestly, I'm not sure why in the notes field, why you can't put like hyphens and stuff.
Yeah.
But if we could click on Show App and Profile Configuration Process, so this is what's going to modify that OOPI screen that your users are going to see during the enrollment process. So we're going to click Yes here. And there's some initial settings that we're going to want to change. So the first one is show an error when installation takes longer than specified number of minutes. Please change that to 30. And the reason why I typically recommend this is in a lot of educational environments and probably corporate as well, if it takes longer than 30 minutes for the device to set itself up, we've probably got a problem we got to figure out, or there's an application that's too large and we got to deploy it a different way. Like if it's over 30 minutes, people are probably getting a little bit angry that it hasn't set itself up yet. Now, so you see where if an error does occur, show a custom message when the time limit or error occurs. And you see where it says setup cannot be completed, please try again or contact your support person for help. What a lot of educational institutions will do is they will remove that and they will import whatever it is that they do for their customers to access their ticketing system. So if it's like, please go to this URL to access Jira and put in a ticket with your help desk, or please contact support at this, phone number and extension. This is where you're going to want to put this, because if somebody is at home, for example, setting up a device and it's having issues and they want to call someone and have them walk them through it, this is what's going to warn them that the setup had an issue and to ask for help. So feel free to change that message with whatever works for your organizations. Now, the other options we're going to leave on, and for now, we're going to click yes and yes to these other two options down below. And the reason being is, so if you see the option where it says block device use until all apps and profiles are installed, this is really important on the education side because say, for example, you have a filtering provider or a security policy that needs to be pushed out to the device before a student can access the desktop. This is the mechanism that we're going to use to do that. And so it's always important that that is set to yes. For testing, if you want to, you can set it to no until you kind of get the environment brought online a little bit more. But during this design and test phase, I always set that to yes. Now we're going to allow users to reset device if installation error occurs. Now, I always like to set that to yes, even for student devices, because we all know that network issues occur and that, the wireless access point could shut off or have an issue during setup, or, someone might be at home and their ISP freaks out for a second, little issues can occur. And so it's always nice to give the user the option to reset the device and start from the beginning. And what it'll do is on the bottom right-hand corner, if an installation error occurs, it'll have a little reset device or a little reset option button on the bottom right-hand corner. They'll click it, it'll reinstall Windows, go and put it back at that OOPI state so they can start over. Now, allow users to use device if installation error occurs. We're going to click yes to that for now. But in the future, when we want to go to play this to scale to students, we're going to toggle that to no. Because once we have all of this stable and ready to go and working, we're not going to want users to use the devices if an error occurs. But it's important for us to enable this option during the testing phases because, say, for example, we accidentally push out a policy that really shouldn't be, or if we have like an error that we need to figure out for an application, it's sometimes best just to continue through it and pull logs and then figure out what went wrong, rather than having to reset the device and try and read the logs out of Intune. So we're going to go ahead and click next here. And then we need to add groups. We have to have a way to target this to a level of devices or users. So since in this simulation we're doing device-based groups, we want to apply it to that overarching group that will flow down to all the others. Now, when we're talking about AutoPilot profiles, those are the one exception of things that will not hierarchically inherit down. And the reason being is, say you had an AutoPilot self-deploy profile and you had another one that has a user enrollment profile, okay? There's no way for the system to understand which one is supposed to win. Whereas with an application, it understands, it inherits down, and it combines those settings together. Whereas with an AutoPilot profile, there's no real easy way for it to differentiate that. Now, enrollment status pages, however, where it's modifying that UPI page, that can be broken down by different groups. So say, for example, you get to a point where you really like the automation steps and you want to have all these different subgroups broke down, but you want to have different enrollment status pages for your different subgroups. This is a great way to be able to do that and break down different enrollment status pages based on your use case scenarios. This is extremely helpful at the university level because, say, for example, you have technical staff that are on premises that have to have different security settings than, say, staffers that are, BYOD or remote. This gives you some of those granular controls to separate that from the enrollment status page perspective. So we're going to click Add Groups on the top left-hand corner under Included Groups, and we're going to type in the word Devices. Now, the reason why I'm saying him to do that, if you notice, I'm having him look for the word that's at the last name of the group name. Now, I'm not quite sure how the system intelligently kind of goes through and scans things, but I always recommend using either the first word in the group name or the last. It seems to always work better that way. So if we remember from our hierarchy, Contoso School Devices is the one that is hierarchically over all the others. So we're going to select that one. That's departments devices. Remember, we want the second one down. So we're going to click Remove. Yeah, right there. And click Select. All right, and then Next. And then next again, this is scope tags. I'll go more into that in a future session. We don't really need to worry about that today. And then we're going to create. Awesome. Now we've got our initial enrollment status page created, so we can go through that initial process. Now there's a couple of other areas I want to go through and kind of clear out some settings because on the business side, you won't need to deal with this at all. But on the Intune for Education side, we integrate some base policies and pre-activate them for you. But in a lot of cases, you're not going to want them pre-activated because it shuts off a lot of other features. So to get around this kind of snafu, Alex, could we please go over to Devices? And then Configuration Profiles. And if you'll notice, we've got our default policies for EDU, our addition upgrade, and our shared PC policies. So those are the ones I was talking about, and then the default ADMX policy. So these are the ones that I'm talking about that we're going to want to unassign. So if you could please click on the default ADMX policy for EDU and click into that, please. And go to Properties. Scroll down. So you see where it says Assignments. Let's go ahead and click Edit. And we're going to click Remove here. So we can keep these settings in case we want to use them in the future, but we're removing them from applying to the all device group. Because remember, once Intune starts its stuff, if something's deployed to all devices, it literally and truly will apply to all devices in your environment. So let's go ahead and review and save this, please. And then save again. Yep, and then Alex, we're going to do that to the other ones that were in the console. So we're going to go back up to devices and configuration profiles. And we're going to do that for all these other ones that are in here.
Okay.
Now, for those of you that don't care to keep these settings, you can hit the ellipse menu on the right-hand side and delete them out of your console if you want to create your own. But some of my EDU customers like to come in here and see, what some of the default settings are, just in case it's something that they might want to use, just to see what was in the system. Yep, and then preview and save. Yep. Yeah, and sorry, like I said, that only EDU customers have to kind of go through this. And the biggest reason why I always turn these off, if you don't, it immediately will start like BitLocker encryption. It'll shut off OneDrive. It'll force like Defender policies. Like I feel more comfortable when I walk through customers, and I'll be doing this in a future presentation where I help you with those settings. Yeah, and save. And then there should just be that last one. Yep, shared PC policy. That really is intended for kiosk devices, and I'm not quite sure why we always deploy that to like every device in an Intune environment or for EDU the first time, because not every device is going to want to be used as a kiosk. Okay, so now that we've got that configured real quick, there's one other thing that we want to double check and make sure that we turn off before we go ahead with this test. So we're going to go back to devices, enroll devices, and Windows Hello. Perfect. Click this here. All right, so it is disabled in this one, which is great. I've actually been doing this for a long time with Intune tenants for the first time. Make sure that in your environment, before you proceed with this is disabled. If you started your tenant a year or so ago and just left it at the defaults, this might be enabled. Please make sure that this is disabled. If you do want to use Windows Hello, which is the facial recognition sign-in piece, there is a separate policy that we're going to want to configure to enable that. If you enable this here, you'll force every device to enable and use Windows Hello. And if you're in a shared lab situation, or you're in a, like we were talking about earlier, a kiosk mode, and a student signs in, they're not going to be able to get to the desktop until they get Windows Hello set up. So in educational environments, we want this turned off right off the gate. So please, please, please just make sure that this is turned off. Now, there is one other setting that I want to make sure that we go and change, and that is called Azure Security Defaults. Now, all new tenants have this pre-activated, and we do it for security purposes, and it was mainly intended for enterprise. But if we don't go and change the setting, what will happen is the first time that you sign in, Windows Hello will be ignored, but it'll force the users to go through MFA setup processes. So Alex, if you could please open a new tab and go to portal.azure.com, please. I'd appreciate it, and sign in with that admin account. All right, perfect. And then under Manage Azure Active Directory, click View, please.
Sorry, say that again.
Manage Azure Active Directory, click View. Yep. All right, on the left-hand side, click Security, please. Oh, no, I'm sorry. That's to set up your policy on your own. Go back up a level. And go into properties, please. It's down a little bit of the farther left. Yeah, right there. Perfect. And then do you see where it says at the bottom, Manage Security Default? It's hidden. That's why it always takes a minute. But click on the Manage Security Defaults, please. Okay, good. It's set to No. Before you start with this test in your environments, please make sure that this is set to No, because otherwise, like I said, it's going to force the user to go through multi-factor authentication setup processes in your environment. And when you're doing that on the EDU side, it's not going to go the best, because more than likely, if you give it to a student to test with, they're not going to have a phone to set that up. So just make sure that that's set to No. All right, so good. We can go ahead and proceed from here. Go ahead and close out this tab. We don't need this one for now. All right, so now that we've got all of this other stuff set up first, now we're going to go into automatic enrollment because I want to explain really quick how this functions. All right, so quick bullet point. For corporate-owned devices, devices that you purchase, and devices that you want managed, that is the top one, the MDM user scope. You want that set to all. Now, the second one, MAM user scope, that is referring to BYOD, bring your own device scenarios. Now, on the enterprise side, this is a very common occurrence because if someone wants to pay for a device to be able to use it in their environment, companies typically don't care. They can purchase what they want. But on the education side, they don't want BYOD in a lot of cases because if they do BYOD, then they're responsible for the security, the Windows antivirus, and everything else on the device. And so in a lot of cases in the education sector, they do not want BYOD enabled. So by default, you can see in here that that is set to none for the second one. But just in case your environment has a different setting set for this, please make sure that you've got it set to none for the second one and all for the MDM user scope for this test. Now, if you want to do BYOD in the future, please feel free to go ahead and click the all button on and get it set up with the specific options that you need. But for the purpose of this test and for EDU, we don't want it on. So that's perfectly fine with these settings. So let's go back up to devices and enroll devices. All right, yep, click in here real quick. And then we're going to create our deployment profiles. So if we click on deployment profiles right here and create profile, we're going to click on Windows PC. And the name is going to be for this one. And obviously you can rename this whatever you'd like. But this one's going to be Contoso Schools User Enrollment. AutoPilot Profile. And for the description, we're going to put this AutoPilot profile is intended for devices that are given to a dedicated user. All right. Now you can go ahead and next through here, but to kind of explain that a little bit more. So this specific AutoPilot profile that we're configuring is meant to be used in the context of the user gets the device, they unbox it, they sign in with their email address, and they let it set up and configure itself from there. This is very different from self-deploy. So let's go ahead and click next.
Tyler, why wouldn't they want to toggle this to yes?
That's a good question, a little bit of a complicated one. Typically, that option is meant for hybrid enrolled devices that you're going through the process the first time. You're using the group policy method to get them hybrid enrolled, and you don't want to have to get the AutoPilot hardware hashes from all of those older devices. That's what that's intended for.
Okay.
But since this is simulating a new device, we don't want that option configured because the intention is that the partner has put the device in AutoPilot for you. Okay. That is meant for the group policy method where they've added the group policy in and they're bringing in older devices into the Intune infrastructure.
Okay.
So we want user driven. We want Azure AD joined. But if you click on the Azure AD joined dropdown real quick, this is where that hybrid Azure AD joined option presents itself that I was talking about earlier. But there are some additional complexities that come with that. So for now, we're going to do Azure AD joined and proceed down that path for now. Now, there's some options down here, but most of this is just going to suppress the screens in UBI so the users don't have to deal with them. But the allow pre-provisioned deployment option, if you look at that down below, let's go ahead and click yes and then kind of move your mouse over it so we can see what it's talking about. So what this is talking about, if you enable this setting, if your environment is the type where your technical staff really prefer to set up the devices on their own, they don't want the users doing it, but they still want to use user-driven methods so the device is assigned to that user. What you can do here is you can allow the pre-provisioned deployment steps in. What it'll do is any apps and policies and profiles that you have assigned to the device level will automatically pull down to the device when you do that 5 times. And what it'll do is once it's complete, it'll turn green. and it'll ask you to reseal the device so you can put it back into the box and give it to the user. So in a lot of cases, this is just useful in those, tech bench situations where you want to be the person to set it up. You want to kind of reduce the amount of time it takes the user to set up the device, and you want to take a few steps out of that equation. Now, language and region, we're going to change that to English United States, but obviously if you need another language in here as your default, please feel free to put that in here. And what it will do is when the user signs in for the first time, it's going to recognize that you want the language different, and it's going to switch the language to the other language that you need. So now we want to apply a device name template. Now here's where it can get a little bit sticky, but typically where I recommend doing is to do a 3-letter acronym that has to do with your organization. So in this case, we're going to do CTO for Contoso, and we're going to do a hyphen, and then a %, and then the word serial all capitalized. The system is very picky about that, by the way. I'm not sure why. And then another %. And you can see above this, it's talking about that in case you need to see something to see as you're typing it in. Now, this, during that process, is going to name that device with the CTO acronym and then the serial number at the end. And why this is usually beneficial. When you're moving to more of this cloud-based management system, a lot of times when a customer has an issue, and even in education, this applies the same, they're going to go look on the device, they're going to flip it over and look at the serial number, or they're going to flip the desktop over and look at the serial number on that. And that's probably what they're going to call you with. Now, if you have an advanced asset tagging system and you've got it integrated with like your asset tracking system and everything else, obviously we'll have to have some discussions, and that's why my more advanced POCs, that's why I do those. But just for the normal consumers that don't need a bunch of fancy naming conventions or to do it by like IP address, this is a great way to do it. Let's go ahead and click next and add groups. And we're going to add that user enrollment pilot group. Now, the reason why I put pilot at the end of both of those is if you already have an environment with AD Connect running, you're going to notice that all of your groups are in there, and it's going to be sometimes hard to look for things. Like I said earlier, with the word pilot at the end, I just have to look for the word pilot, and it's only going to show me entries that have recently been created that have the word pilot in there. So it makes it a lot easier to look for those two groups. All right, we're going to click select down at the bottom right. And we're going to click next and create. Okay, now we've got our AutoPilot profile assigned, and we have it assigned to that security group. But that security group doesn't have any way to know that that device is AutoPilot. So how are we going to fix that? Well, we're going to click on groups, and we're going to go to that 1v1 AutoPilot group. Yep, we're going to click into it here. It's at the top. And we're going to go to properties. And we're going to change this drop down for membership type from assigned dynamic device. Now, this is a feature all included in A3, A5, E3, E5, and the subsequent variations for the other two. So make sure that you're licensed for this. Specifically, it's looking for Azure AD Premium P1 for this feature. Now we're going to click on Add Dynamic Query. And this is how we're going to tell the system to look into the AutoPilot environment and automatically assign things. Now I'm going to pull up my demo tenant for just a quick second. On the right-hand side, do you see where it says Edit with the pencil? We're going to click that one so we can manually copy and paste in a rule syntax. But say, for example, you're fine using the system to create it for you. Do you see where it says property, operator? Like if you can hit the X in the top right-hand corner real quick, just so I can show. And then value. If you want to customize your own and do it that way, you can use that here, and then it will auto-fill in the rule syntax below for you. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up, if you want to get really fancy with this and make a bunch of different rule syntaxes, based on department, based on job title, like all these different pieces, you can do that. And I know the system will say that after 5 it can't add anymore, but that's actually not true. If you edit it with the rule syntax and you copy and paste the extra entries in here, it'll still work. And as far as I understand, if you're going to the rule syntax and editing it manually on the right-hand side, there is no limit to how many if this, then do that statements that you can have. So I just wanted to bring that out there real quick and explain for that. Now, I'm going to put the rule syntax in the chat so that Alex can copy and paste it. But understand, you might want to customize this to your environment. So usually what we see on the EDU side, we have an order ID of faculty. And the way that this works is you'll talk to your partner or your customer, or sorry, you'll talk to your partner or your DSS person or whoever's doing the device ordering, and you'll say, hey, I am ordering 500 new faculty devices. Make sure you use this AutoPilot hardware, you use this AutoPilot device group. And what they'll do is in the system, they'll assign this device group to the devices it's imported into AutoPilot. And if you click OK here real quick, and then save this rule real quick, and then save it up here, and yes. All right, now if we go back over to devices and enroll devices, and then devices on the bottom right-hand corner, we're going to simulate us manually assigning that group tag to it. So you click over the serial number, and you see the group tag option on the right-hand side. We're going to put in that word faculty with the capital F. Perfect. And we're going to click save. Now, since we're doing this in a simulated environment and it's been brought online for the first time, this part of the process will take a couple of minutes. So here in a moment, we're going to go to a couple of other areas in the system to kind of get them set up. But understand, as you're going through this, device groups with the dynamic device memberships will pull and make changes about every 45 minutes. It's not an instant process. But usually, that's technically what Microsoft, like within 45 minutes. But usually, I see this process apply and finish within about 10, and in some cases, even less than 2. It really just depends on how much load Intune and AutoPilot environments are currently experiencing at that time. And so that's really what gauges it. There's nothing that you can do on the customer side to kind of fix this. And the reason being is when the partner imports this into the AutoPilot systems, they usually do it around midnight. And, usually, you as the customer don't come in until 8 o'clock in the morning or 9 o'clock whenever your day starts. So by then, that 45-minute countdown timer has already been elapsed and AutoPilot's already done its process and chewed through and process things. That's why when you do it from like the partner side, you don't experience that. Whereas when we're doing it in this configuration setting and testing things, you will. So I just wanted to bring that up really quick.
Hey, Tyler. Okay. Really quickly, question on that. So for that rule syntax, there was it was for faculty. Right. Would the rest of the verbiage in that syntax change if they wanted it to be like teachers, for example?
Yep, they would just change it from faculty to teachers. And then a lot of cases, they'll have it broken down in some cases by job titles or departments. It really just depends on how granular the customer wants to get.
Okay, but the rest of the verbiage is fairly standard?
Correct.
Okay, perfect.
Yep. Yeah, you can just keep in mind, I wouldn't make it so infinitely complex that your partner's not going to be able to understand it. Because if you've got like an Excel document that's got like 500 of them in there, and they're all broken out different ways, you'll overly complicate the system. I would really try and keep it to probably about 5 main device groups for the initial AutoPilot deployment steps, and then to make multiple other subgroups underneath that and manually add the devices to it. That's typically how I recommend doing it.
Okay.
But yeah, and to kind of help explain that, so let's go over to our groups tab real quick. And let's click into the 1v1 user enrollment pilot and go to members. So once the system goes through processing this, and you can see it already sees that if there's one device in here, so it's already processed that rule. You see on the top, you've got bulk operations. If you click that button, that gives you the ability to download its members. Now, where this might be very useful for you in your environments is, say, for example, you want to onboard all these devices the exact same way. There's not going to be any difference between the different levels of faculty. But say, for example, you want to separate them by buildings that they might be in, or separate them out like from the warehouse because they're in the boxes there and they got approval to ship them out to the buildings. You would download the members here after the device has already been enrolled, look for the serial number, and then you would add it to the subgroups underneath that you would want using the import button. That way, if you want that granular control and to separate things out by different, building levels or device group levels, you can do that. And on the Intune for Education portal, really quick, if you could go over to that, Alex.
Yep.
If you look on the left-hand side barcode scanner, click that, please. So say, for example, you bought all these devices, they're sitting in boxes, they got the AutoPilot hardware hashes imported, but they're still in your warehouse. Well, you need to get them added into groups so that they can go through that process. Here, you can go down here and click Next. And then you can import them from a CSV file, or you can scan them with a scanner that's plugged into it. And what the meaning for this is, it's meant to have like the boxes all lined up, and you just scan. You tell it the action, and the action is to add it to this group. And then that subgroup underneath, as you scan it, it's adding all those devices to that subgroup. So that way you're not having to manually move it after they've been enrolled. That's just a nice thing that Intune for Education's added in here to make it easier for our educational institutions. So I just wanted to point that out real quick, that from an inventory perspective, if this is helpful for you, you do have access to this. I'm sorry, unfortunately, enterprise customers, you will not have access to this feature. So if we could continue on from here, let's see what we've got here. So let's go over to devices, enroll devices, and deployment profiles, because I want to take a moment to kind of explain the differences. All right, so this one that we created is user-driven. Let's create another one, Alex, and call it click Windows PC, Contoso School Self-Deploy Mode AutoPilot Profile. Perfect. Yep, go ahead and correct things. Yep, and then this one, this is intended for the description. This is intended for shared devices, such as labs, kiosk devices, and shared laptop carts.
I don't know why I capitalized.
I do it too, so don't worry. So yeah, I'm not sure why I do it, but yeah, so what this is referring to, so, and the other enrollment method that we went through, AutoPilot assigns the user to that device, and you can see that. So if you deploy a user-based application or a user policy, it'll apply it to that device because it sees that it's tethered to that user. In a self-deploy mode simulation, there is no user tethered to that device. It's considered to be a lab device, or, excuse me, just in general, a shared device that you're going to want to use. So when you're kind of thinking about the design of your environments, kind of think about that. If you're doing lab devices and shared device carts, you will not be able to use the ability to push out applications at the user level or the policies at the user level. You'll have to do everything based on the device and the device groups. That's why I always recommend my customers create that hierarchy and deploy things like that out at least a level up above it, so that way the policies can inherit down. So that's just the biggest kind of difference between user-driven deployment and self-deployment. I know another kind of big thing with this too, self-deployment will typically have more errors than user-driven deployment. And the reason being is self-deployment is fully automated. Once the device sees that it's connected to the internet, AutoPilot will try and set it up and go through the steps to set it up. Or if it's not joined to anything like Wi-Fi or network related, once you go through and connect it to Wi-Fi and hit next, then it'll start setting itself up automatically. Problem is say, for example, there's a TPM attestation issue, which is that security chip I was talking about, or a network issue. self-deploy mode is not the most resilient to little snafus and hiccups like that. So just to understand, if you're having problems with enrollment and you need to test things, test with user enrollment first, then move to self-deploy. If you can't get user enrollment to work, that's where you really need to start, because you've already got probably some network configuration issues that are on the back end that you need to fix. And the other part to this too is on the guide that I'll be included in this, we'll have like the network prerequisites and all the other stuff that you might want to take into consideration before you go ahead with the test.
So Tyler, adding, or maybe adding to that. So if let's say an IT director had, which I feel like maybe this is fairly popular, they've got Chromebooks in their environment, but they want to use Intune to manage their labs. They would need to purchase an Intune device-based license.
Correct.
And then they would create this. They would create this profile here in order to manage those specific devices, not by user, but by device.
Correct.
Okay.
Exactly. And when you purchase those device-based licenses, technically speaking, you're not going to assign them you're not going to assign them to anything in the system. It's just to show that you've paid for that device-based license to manage it. Because remember, when you purchase user-based licenses in those A3 bundles, the anticipation is that user is going to use a device, and so it gives them an Intune license. Correct. In a shared scenario, that's typically where you need that shared device license. Now, obviously, though, reach out to your partner and your CE, because some contracts do have exclusions. So I don't want to speak to that. Like, please reach out to the licensing specialist to confirm that specific deployment scenario.
Yeah.
But okay, if we could go ahead and next this right here for me, please. And change this from user-driven to self-deploy mode. I know it'll say preview, but it's been saying preview for like 5 years. So operating system default, change that. And we're going to do English United States again for this simulation. But obviously, if you need a different language, change that in here. Now, keep that in mind. If you do self-deploy mode and the initial language that was shipped on the devices is a different language, until you get it connected to the internet, it's not going to know to switch to another language. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're thinking about that. Now, if you're ordering devices from a partner, you should be able to ask them that question to have it defaulted to something else. But that's more so on the WW side that you'll need to work with your partner to make sure that that's being engaged. But I did just want to let you know about that little snafu from the language and region perspective. Now we're going to go ahead and apply that same device template that we did the other group for testing. But in some cases, you might want to change this just with a different naming convention. In a lot of cases, I'll see they want to separate it by, different lab names, because this might be the CTE lab or however it might be broken down. Just keep in mind, go ahead and put a dash in there too, please, Alex. Just for me, I like having the dash. That way there's a little bit of separation between the naming convention and the serial number. It just makes it look a little bit cleaner in the interface. But all right, if you go ahead and click next, please. And then add groups. And then search for pilot. And we're going to add the self-deploy mode pilot. Perfect. That's the other group. All right, awesome. And then next. And then create. All right, now that we've gone through and created these 2 deployment profiles for our simulation, we're going to go check and see if that device has got its AutoPilot profile assigned. Since we've gone through and done a few steps, we should be good to go, but let's go ahead and go down to devices, enroll devices, and devices on the bottom right-hand corner, and let's click over it. Now we can see group tag and profile status is assigned. Great. So as you can see here, we've got our Contoso Schools User Enrollment AutoPilot profile assigned. So it automatically added the devices into that group based on the group tag, and it automatically applied those profiles. Now there's a couple of other configuration settings I'd like to get set up beforehand, just because I know from a testing perspective, in case you run into issues, you're probably going to want to be a local admin on the device. Now, in another future presentation, I will be showing how to use a CSP to use the older device administration methods. But for the purpose of this demonstration, I'm going to show you how to add a device administrator that can override UAC prompts on every AutoPilot and Intune joined device. So I'm actually going to have you open up your portal.azure.com page again, please, Alex. Sign in with that admin account. And unfortunately, you do have to do this in this portal. It is not available in the Intune for Education or the other portals. So you're going to click on Manage Azure Active Directory View. And then we're going to go to Properties on the left-hand side, please. Or I'm sorry, we're going to click on Devices. Perfect. All right, and we're going to scroll down here because it's, or sorry, not scroll down. We're going to click on Device Settings, top left, and then we're going to scroll down. Now it's tucked away. Now you see this Manage Additional Local Administrators on all Azure AD joined devices. Click that, please. Then click Add Assignments. And then please add that admin account in here, one that you were using. Bruno, yep. Perfect. And Bruno is the same one in my demo tenant. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So now Bruno is an administrator on any device that's gone through this enrollment process, which means after someone signs in case they need to do like the, type in their username and password to do the UAC override, this person is going to be able to do that. And when it asks for that pop-up, you're going to put in their full email address and password of what they have in Azure AD. And that is what will auth them and allow them to install applications and override things manually. It's also useful, and why I do this is because in case you need to pull up like Event Viewer and other diagnostic logs, you can go in there and pull that up with that account. Now, I'm sure you noticed in the AutoPilot profiles that you could make people administrators. However, I always caution education with that, and I know you're probably going to get pushback from principals or other people that kind of like, I need to always have admin rights on my machines and always be able to install whatever I want. Here's the problem with that. In education environments, if you give them admin rights and they don't know what they're clicking and they install something that's malware, Defender will inevitably clean it off, but Defender is initially going to assume that the customer is trusting what they're installing and that it's doing what they want. So oftentimes it's best to not give users that control and to use company portal, make the applications available there because it's a self-service portal where they can install things themselves. And that is what will give them admin rights to install an application rather than you giving it to them. And that's what we call the zero trust kind of architecture. You're going to see that so many times through your Intune and AutoPilot marketing materials, as well as your training documentations. Everything in there is talking about zero trust. And the biggest thing there is that these devices out of the gate don't trust each other. When you're an on-prem domain environment and you're joined to the domain, computer A will trust computer B from a communication level if it needs updates or other things. That's how those devices or that environment was designed to kind of work together. But since we're now talking about things from a cloud perspective, we don't want devices to just natively trust each other. So that's just one thing that we want to think about when we're going through this process of like, hey, what is really, really required for that user to be able to functionally do their job, and do they really need to have admin rights? Because you could really be opening yourself up to a whole can of worms of potential issues, because you don't want to have to try and do this retroactively, where you're trying to stop them from installing malware and create all these Defender policies to prevent them from doing that type of stuff. Kind of think of it as you're taking more of a reactive approach rather than a proactive approach.
So Tyler.
Sorry, Alex.
So Bruno now is assigned to be a global admin at this point?
Not a global admin. That's referring to role-based access controls. He's just an admin on all devices that are
on all devices.
Devices.
Okay.
And it's important. If you put in a principal in here, or a media specialist or a secretary, that gives them admin rights on all devices. So please caution when you're doing this. In the future presentations, I'll show you how to kind of control that into who can do what at like the device level. That's a bit more advanced.
Yeah.
Okay, so now that we've got this assigned, let's go back up to the Device Administrators tab because there's one other thing I want to point out real quick. And sorry, devices, device settings. One more breadcrumb up.
All right. Yep.
All right. You'll want to make sure that users may join devices to Azure AD. In case for some reason you've turned that off, you are going to want that set to all for this test. And then enterprise state roaming, please click on that. So on the left-hand side, right under device settings.
Yep.
Yep. Click that, please, and click all and click save. Those are those accessibility settings, as well as other settings that Microsoft, I'm not quite sure the exact definitions of it, but a lot of the user profile settings that you want to be able to translate that's what allows storing that information. So when they sign into a new device, some of those custom things will pull down. Now they do change things in here, but I think it's things like certain fonts, language packages and stuff. I think that's mostly what's pulled in here. But in a future presentation, I'll be going into a little bit more in-depth analysis of what this specifically does. But for our test, we want to have it enabled.
Perfect.
All right, so now that we've got this all set up, we've got the AutoPilot enrollment profile set up, and we've got our deployment profiles assigned to our groups. Now we're ready to actually enroll the device. So if we can go back to our AutoPilot simulation. And really quick, Alex, before we go in and kind of sign into this as a user for the first time, did you have a particular user that you wanted to test the simulation with other than Bruce? Just so they can see what it would look like for somebody else? Like how about Arden Asher, for example?
Okay.
So let's go ahead and click on left-hand side, just for the simulation here, next to where it says serial number here in the AutoPilot console. Up to left-hand side. Click the little toggle box next to it. So next to 8183, the numbers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and then assign user. And assign that to Arden Asher. And select. And save. All right, perfect. Now do yourself a favor, Alex, real quick before we proceed with this. Yep. Open up an in-private browser tab and sign in to Arden Asher. And make sure that you go through the password reset, because if it's the first time you sign into that account, it's probably going to make you reset the password.
Okay.
And while he's doing that real quick, so in the document guide that I'll be including, I'll have a Windows AutoPilot profile decision tree. And it'll kind of break down like what the type of devices are, what you plan to do with them. And I have it kind of hierarchically broken down of what deployment scenario makes the most sense. So I'm hoping in that'll kind of help in that regard to understand which deployment scenario will make sense based on the devices that you're going to use. And also in the PowerPoint, I've included another simulation of a VM that shows this enrollment process. Okay, so good. You're in Arden Asher's account, no problems there. So let's X out of this and let's go to that VM and let's start the process. Connect to it. Perfect. Let's go ahead and do yes to United States. Yes to US. Skip the layout. That's in case you have multiple languages and you want to have different layouts, like in case you need the UKA keyboard, stuff like that. So this is that part where I was talking about where it's not just checking for updates, it's checking into the AutoPilot service. And as you can see, it's going through those steps and it's going to take a couple of seconds. All right. And then once that's done, it's confirmed. Oh, hey, I'm in the AutoPilot service, but I need to know who's supposed to sign in to me. So go ahead and sign in with Arden Asher's account, please. Now, I know you see the option to sign in with a security key that is only available with A5, and please work with your partner to make sure you work through any snafus because there is some complexity with that. But what's also nice too is under sign-in options, if the user already has their multi-factor authenticator app set up, what's nice is you can click on the sign-in options, enter the email, and just hit approve, and it'll just take you straight to the next page rather than entering the password. That's nice in case that might be useful for some users that have already set up their MFA deployment and have the app where it's set to approve or deny. Yep, and we'll enter, our Asher's password in here. Cool. And sign it. Yep.
Hey, Tyler, so I know that this is a demo for like a first-time Ubi. Would the IT director have to do all these steps for every time they get a new machine, or this is just like an initial setup?
This is just an initial setup for this environment. Now that we've got all these policies and things in place, as long as we use the naming conventions and stuff that we've used, we can go to full production with this and scale this to thousands of devices.
Okay.
But now we see it's going through its steps. So if you could click the little down arrow on this, please, Alex, I'd like to kind of explain what it's doing. So as you can see right now, it's going through your device preparation steps. Securing your hardware is where it's talking to that TPM chip and making sure that it's exchanging that security information between Azure AD and your device. Now, if you're going to test this in your simulated VM environments as well, please make sure that you enable the toggle box option under Hyper-V that allows it to simulate a virtual TPM, because if not, that part will fail because it'll think the device doesn't have one. Once it goes there, it goes to join your organization's network, which is where it creates that device object in Azure AD. Registering your device for mobile management, that is where it checks to see if Intune is supposed to be the MDM for it, or in a hybrid state, if that's supposed to be the MDM for it. And then preparing your device for mobile management, that is where it's installing the Intune management extension and getting the device set up. Now that part will take a couple of seconds because the Intune management engine, that's what's actually controlling the service of Intune on the device itself, it's a Win32 app, and it does take a couple of seconds to silently install. And the reason being is it's collecting information about the device for the first time, importing it into your Intune console, importing it into Azure AD. It's collecting like serial number information. Like, it's trying to make it as simple as possible that if you need to find this device in the future, that it's got all the information about it. So it's just really nice because you don't have to worry about when you do these large device purchases, I got to track the MAC addresses, the serial numbers. Like, I got to track all this information about the device. No, Intune and AutoPilot will actually do that part for you. Now, like I said, this setup does take a little bit. And since we are on a simulated VM, it does take a little bit longer because, unfortunately, it's sharing the internet with his main computer, and it will take a little bit longer. So usually in a simulated test, I do recommend to use if you can, like a purchase device that you've had in a box that's never been joined to your AD infrastructure. Or if you're going through your DSRs, they have access to me and the POC pilot system, and I will walk you through this and help you with it. So if you are one of my managed accounts, please feel free to reach out to my DSR team and they'll get you scheduled. So if we can click on the device setup caret so I can explain those pieces. So you can see it's looking at security policies and it's already too quick. It was checking for the security policies and other stuff that we've had set up. Now, since we don't have any of that set up initially, it just was able to go straight through and reboot. But if we had had a large amount of policies set up, we would have seen those in there and we would have seen as it completed them. So it's just nice to understand if you have a large amount of policies and profiles in here, just be very careful. Now it's finished device setup, and now it's doing the account setup. That's where it's applying account-specific settings. Now, here are two things that it's going to ask them because we're very big on privacy compared to our other competitors. We want the users to be able to access this. Now, the first thing you're going to notice is location, and they can turn it off. So, in this situation, yes, let's turn the location feature off, but leave Find My Device on. But what I want to specify, on the EDU side, even though the users can toggle this option off, you do have the ability to overwrite this if the device is seen that it's like lost and stolen. So don't think that if the user toggles this on, that you are not able to toggle this on after the fact. This is more so just understanding that Microsoft services will not do that. So you can see it's talking about it there, the weather application and stuff like that. So let's actually leave it on, Alex, in this case. But in some cases, if your user they don't want it to be tracked at all for any of the local services, like weather and stuff like that, this is where they can toggle it off. Let's go ahead and click next. Keep these default. And then next again. Accept. And then from here, now that we've accepted all those other little menus, in case there's any specific customizations, it's going to go through, and the final check that it's going to do is it's going to go and check if there's like any immediate like security patches that need to be installed for the device to function properly. Because what used to happen in years past, say you bought a device for the first time, and say the OEM and the manufacturer had some sort of AutoPilot glitch, and it was just borked from the beginning. Well, in previous environments, once that happened, you were kind of stuck. Like there was nothing that you could do. Now, with the AutoPilot service, in case there's some sort of snafu, usually the partner can work with Microsoft to get it patched on the AutoPilot side, and then it can proceed with going through the steps of getting the AutoPilot hashes and enrolling itself. So it's just, in case you run into issues, don't feel like you're just stuck from there. We can work with the partners. Now from here, the device is enrolled. We're now to a login screen. Now in the future, I will show you how to have it autofill your domain, so it's similar to an on-premises AD device, so that way they don't have to do that, and they're just typing in their username and password. But for this first sign in, go ahead and click into this, please, Alex, and then finish signing in as Arden Asher. You'll type in the full email address and the password. And once this completes, there'll be just another couple of final steps real quick. Right here. Perfect.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's funny, Alex. Sometimes my most popular accounts, I have like a OneNote and I have it like all like copy and paste.
I don't think you can copy and paste on the VM.
After it's been enrolled and RDP services has been installed, yes, you can.
Oh, okay then.
But usually in this simulated environment, you can't.
Okay.
Like if they're testing this on like their VMware infrastructures for Parallels or something, they'll notice that they won't have that kind of limitation either.
Okay.
So now that we've signed in, go ahead and just set this to large and connect to it, please. So drag the slider all the way over and connect. Perfect. And then go ahead and type it again real quick. Sign in. That was just because we set it to full screen the first time on a VM.
Yeah.
You won't have that issue on a .ice, but you see now it's pulling down his photo. So the photo that he has in Azure AD, it pulls it down to the device. And now it finishes the final account setup phase. Now, why it has to go through this and finalize things, so if you hit the little drop-down menu, say you have the specific things that are account level, like certificates, security policies, or network connections, for example, that only certain staff should have access to or should be using for security purposes. This is where it's doing that final stage of setting it up. Now, earlier when I showed you that screen where it was talking about the pre-provisioning steps, these are the steps that it's kind of filling in for you and kind of precursory doing that, like the device preparation, the device setup, like these are the steps that it's going through for you, and then it's just asking for the user to sign in. Since we're doing it this way, we've got to finish letting those policies pull down. This does take a few seconds, and the biggest reason, so remember earlier when we were talking about the all devices and all users options. The biggest reason why you will not want to use that in your device deployments is because when you deploy it to all users and all devices, depending on which one you select, it's got to query every user or every device in the system, and then question that, and then know, oh, it's this device that's in this set of groups that should have these security policies. And if you really, really make that complicated, it'll slow down how quickly the system can go through this final process, and it'll make it longer. So it's usually pretty ideal to keep this as limited as possible. You only want to do like the most required security policies, the certificates and stuff like that, to just get the device operational and running. And then you can push out subsequent policies after the fact that are not required and won't slow it down. So we're here, and it should take a few more seconds. We're just identifying our security policies and stuff like that. And in the meantime, I can also discuss, so say, for example, BitLocker security. And that's sometimes a point of contention with OEM devices because BitLocker has to be, and a lot of times, disabled during an update process, especially from like major feature versions from like say Windows 10 to 11. And so with this new system, you can actually use the AutoPilot service in Intune to deploy a BitLocker policy. So as the user is signing in for the first time, it will encrypt the drive automatically and silently, and the user won't notice anything. And in a future presentation, I'll be going over that. But as you can see, within roughly about, oh, what would you say, Alex? What, 10 minutes maybe?
Yeah.
The device has been completely set up, and you're now at the desktop, and the user can start using the device. Now, this was all I wanted to go through today because this was a big thing, just to get a device to a point where it's in your environment and you can test it yourself. Now, in my future meetings, I'm going to be going through most commonly used policies in EDU, most commonly deployed applications, how to deploy them, how to import apps, and I'm going to be showing Alex step-by-step how to do all of that, from the PowerShell script prompts, everything. So if that interests you in the future, definitely please be on the lookout for the future recordings, because I'm going to be going through step-by-step, just like I did with this deployment, of how to do all those different pieces. So we're going to be doing update settings, security settings, BitLocker configuration pieces. I'm going to be going over, what's included in E3 and A3 from a security perspective, what's included in A5, and really just break it down. So from here, as well as this, on the documentation that I'll be including later tonight or tomorrow, I've also got a looking forward and resources tab in there. And it's got a breakdown of all these different links, all the stuff we went through today, the videos, like everything that we've done. So that way, in case you want to understand things from like the nitty-gritty perspective, you have that ability to go to that documentation and look at it. Additionally, in the documentation, I also included access to a developer environment where if you want to go and create something yourself and you want to test it, feel free to do it at home on a device if you'd like to. The dev environment will give you access to, I think, Alex, what, 25 license keys, something like that?
I think it's 25.
Yeah, 25 license keys. So it'll give you access to that. And as long as you sign in every 90 days, it'll keep that demo account active and you can continue to test with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Alex, are there any more additional questions? Anything else you want to like kind of cover the first time? So we really just went through everything that's needed to get an initial device in a good testing phase.
Correct. And I guess just to clarify, this could be, let's say an IT director, like really, this is from the ground up. If they followed each one of these steps, they would be totally fine, and this would work in their environment.
Yes, they should be totally fine. Now, like I said, if they've already set up Intune previously and they've got a bunch of policies and settings set up, they'll definitely probably want to reach out to someone to make sure it's not being applied to all devices. But if it's the first demo environment or the first time they're setting it up, yes, you can continue from this and move into production.
Awesome. I think that's it for me.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate it. But that was today's video. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great day.